صباح الخير، يعطيكم العافية. أنا دكتورة آلاء بواعنة، رح أدرسكم ال reproductive part of the urogenital system. رح ناخد 4 محاضرات face to face ومحاضرتين حيكونوا recorded على e-learning. mainly إحنا حنحكي عن reproductive system of course طبعاً بالميل والفيميل. الريفرنس تبعكم هو Guyton and Hall, but whatever you can read, you can get the information, just go ahead. أنا أسئلتي mainly حتكون من السلايدز لأنه السلايدز هم exactly the book material. But يعني إذا ما فهمتوا أي شيء بالسلايد you can go back to the book and find the information. معظم محاضراتنا حيكونوا عن الفيميل reproductive system باعتبار إنه الفيميل يعني reproductive system تبعها هو مسؤول عن conception and preparing the female body to be pregnant and during the pregnancy and after the pregnancy. So حناخد معظم المحاضرات حتكون عن الفيميل reproductive system، حناخد عن الميل reproductive system ونقارن بعض الأشياء فيما بينهم. فنبلش بمحاضرة اليوم حناخد عن الفيميل reproductive system before pregnancy and the female hormones. هلا زي ما حكينا بالنسبة للفيميل reproductive functions it's all about how to prepare her body to be pregnant and the period of pregnancy itself and after the pregnancy. أكيد أخذتوا بالanatomy the parts of the female reproductive system. It starts with the ovaries in both sides of the body, then the fallopian tubes that are connecting the ovaries to the uterus, then the uterus, the fundus, the body and the cervix, and beneath it the vagina and the outer parts, plus the mammary glands. So the mammary glands are considered as a part of the reproductive system in the female. Here is another interior view for the female reproductive system, which is composed of both ovaries on both sides of the body, left side and right side. We have the fallopian tubes. The fallopian tube, it have the fimbriae at the side of the ovary to increase the percentage or the probability of catching the ovum after it's ovulated from the ovaries. We have the ampulla of the fallopian tube, which is most of the time the area where the fertilization of the oocyte with the sperm will happen. And then we have the isthmus, where the fallopian tube will enter the uterus. And here is the uterus. So according to the female reproductive system, we have 2 parts. هلا احنا لما نتعلم عن reproduction in the female body, we are talking about 2 pathways. One of them will happen in the ovaries, and synchronizing to that at the same time parallelly, there are some changes are happening in the uterus. So the ovaries are preparing the ovum to be ovulated. Then the ovum will be waiting for sperm here to be fertilized. At the same time, the uterus will prepare itself. Then if this ovum will be fertilized by the sperm, then the uterus will be the place where the zygote will be implanted and the conception and the pregnancy will take place. So we will talk about in this lecture about the ovarian cycle, which is composed of 3 phases, and as well as the endometrial cycle, which is 3 phases we will talk about in the next lecture, inshallah. So we will start talking about the oogenesis. What do we mean by oogenesis? Which is oocyte generation. Or هلا احنا رح نحكي oocyte, ovum, egg كله نفس المعنى اللي هي البويضة. So talking about the oogenesis, looking at or zooming in into the ovary is composed of different parts. Looking at the ovaries, it's telling us there are some stages that will take place in the ovary and end up with the ovulation, and after the ovulation there are some stages are taking place in the ovaries. What will happen that we have something what we call primordial follicles in the ovaries. Where does these primordial follicle come from? Now, the oogenesis, which is the ovum production or the oocyte generation, it starts in the female body before birth. شو يعني before birth? In the prenatal area. يعني الفيميل بيبي وهي ببطن أمها، هلا في عملية الأورجانوجينيسيس أول 3 شهور من الحمل. During that time, before birth, في germ cells بالfemale body اللي هم primordial germ cells, they will be migrating into the ovarian cortex. So the organs inside her body are forming, are developing. One of these organs, the ovaries. So the primordial germ cells will be migrating into the ovarian cortex, and during that time it will undergo repeated cell divisions. Now these primordial germ cells, when are reaching the ovarian cortex, they will be transformed into what we call primordial ovum or oogonium. This primordial ovum, when it reaches the ovarian cortex, the stroma around it, it will be epithelioid. It will start changing its characteristics, so it will be epithelial cells. We call them granulosa cells. So the primordial ovum, surrounded by one layer of granulosa cells, we call it primordial follicles. And these are the primordial follicles that are present in the ovaries. Now, at birth, and during that time, during the pregnancy time, this primordial follicle will be developed into what we call a primary oocyte. This primary oocyte will be arrested in prophase 1, so no more division will be undergoing at this point. So we know that the cell division تكون من prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. So the primary oocyte will be arrested in the prophase at this time. Now the primary oocyte at some point at birth, this primary oocyte will be surrounded by several layers of granulosa cells. And that's what we call primary follicle. Now, there are some resources that are saying the female will be born with primordial follicle in her ovaries. Some are saying it will be born with primary follicles in her ovaries. And some are saying that she has both. We will go with the primordial follicle or, resources. So the female will be born with a primordial follicle in her ovaries. So at birth, the female will be born with 1 to 2 million of primary oocyte as primordial follicles in her ovaries. Okay? هلا at birth بتكمل الفيميل هلا at birth في مرحلة childhood. خلال مرحلة childhood ما في أي development أو changes it will happen to these stuff, to the primary follicle, to primordial follicle, or to the primary oocyte, majorly the primary oocyte. Nothing will happen. But at puberty, at the age 11, 12, until menopause. So from puberty until menopause, we call it the reproductive age. During this time, the primary oocyte will undergo the first meiosis, and it will be transformed into secondary oocyte. So the primary oocyte will be divided and produce two bodies. We have the first polar body and the secondary oocyte. Why it divided into two bodies? علشان النمبر of chromosomes to cut in half. بدل ما يكونوا 46 chromosomes كم يصيروا 23. علشان السكندري oocyte تكون فيها one set of chromosomes, then it will be ready to be fertilized by a sperm, another 23 chromosomes, and by their fertilization, it will have the complete number of a human cell chromosomal number. The first polar body will be degenerated in the ovaries. Now, the primary oocyte will undergo the first meiosis. At that time, these changes will happen inside the follicle. So the oocyte inside the ovary will be stored inside these follicles. It will be surrounded by granulosa cells. What is the importance of these granulosa cells? They are the source of nourishment for this oocyte. Now, احنا حكينا during the childhood ما في أي development بصير على primary oocyte. ليه؟ بالchildhood ما في هرمونات، تمام؟ هلا هاي العملية كلها عملية الانقسامات وعملية إنه يصير في عندي development, it will undergo under the control of anterior pituitary hormones. We have the hypothalamus gland, which is producing gonadotropic releasing hormone. It will go into the anterior pituitary and stimulate the release of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, FSH and LH. During childhood, this axis is not present. So in the female, during the childhood, there will be no hormones to stimulate this process. Also, the granulosa cells that are surrounding these oocytes, they will produce what we call oocyte maturation inhibiting factor. So they will keep the primary oocyte arrested in this prophase, and no further division will happen during the childhood. Until she reaches the puberty, then the anterior pituitary will start producing its hormones gradually. Then these processes will start taking place, and the female body will start producing the oocyte. So the secondary oocyte will be ovulated outside of the pre-ovulatory follicle, which we call mature follicle. It has several layers of granulosa cells. It has another stromal cells we call theca cells. And inside the follicle, we have like an empty place that is filled with estrogen. They are coming from the granulosa cells. And then this mature follicle, when it's ready to be ruptured and release its secondary oocyte, that process we call it ovulation. So this pre-ovulatory follicle will rupture and the secondary oocyte will come outside and it will be ready to be fertilized. Now, when it meets with the sperm, the second meiosis will take place. And so the secondary oocyte, the primary oocyte can't arrested بالprophase, the secondary oocyte will be arrested in the metaphase. So it didn't complete the division process. When it will be completed? When it meets the sperm. After meeting the sperm, it will complete the second meiosis and it will produce the ovum or the zygote, the fertilized ovum. What will happen to the pre-ovulatory or mature follicle that is ruptured? It will stay in the ovary and it will collect cholesterol inside it. It will have the yellow appearance and we call it the corpus luteum, اللي هو الجسم الأصفر, which is very important during the second time or the second part of the ovarian cycle, and it's very important during pregnancy. Tamam? So if we look at this figure, it makes the stuff is more clear. So we have the ovary is filled with primordial follicles. هلا احنا حكينا الفيميل she will be born with 1 to 2 million of primordial follicles in both ovaries, okay? Now, these 1 to 2 million, are they going to stay with in her body until the puberty? No. The number will be reduced dramatically. Some books it says it will be like 40,000. Some books it's saying it will keep only 400,000, but it's still a huge number. So the female body لأنه during her growth في بعض البرايمورديال follicle ما بكونوا mature enough, بكونوا kind of weak, so they will be degenerated. So that's why we have this huge number and it will be reduced during the childhood until the puberty. Now, the ovary, it will be filled with the primordial follicle. At puberty, when the female will have the hormonal stimulation. هلا هذا الحكي كله حكيناه. هلا نحكي عن الهرمونال situation. So, at the puberty, the female body in the hypothalamus will produce the gonadotropic releasing hormone. It will go to the anterior pituitary, stimulating it to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. هلا هذا الحكي بكون at puberty gradually. يعني من عمر 9 سنين 9 years until to 11 years it will start gradually increase the production of these hormones. At 11 years where the puberty will start يعني نظامي, then these hormones will be secreted regularly every month في لهم pattern معين. هلا بالنسبة لل FSH وال LH, they will go to their target cells or target tissue, which is the ovary in the female. The follicle stimulating hormone, from its name, it's called follicle stimulating. Then it will go to the primordial follicles. It will start to stimulate the follicles to be maturing. And it will stimulate the granulosa cells to produce the estrogen. Now, the luteinizing hormone later in the cycle will be produced and it will stimulate the theca cells to produce the androgens and the progesterone, as well as the LH hormone is the hormone that is responsible for the ovulation process. And so here are the hormones that will be produced from those cells. And once this process happens, then inhibin hormone will be secreted from the ovary, from the granulosa cells, to inhibit the release of follicle stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. So هاي هي الأكسس تيجي هاي الهرمونز from the anterior pituitary بتروح على الأوفريز بتعمل stimulation للبروسيس inside the ovaries for stimulating the maturing of the follicles علشان تبلش السايكل in the female. هلا زي ما حكينا إنه الفيميل بتوصل لمرحلة البيوبرتي عندها 400,000 أو 40,000 of these primordial follicles. هلا still هذا النمبر very high لأنه الفيميل during her reproductive life رح normally regularly رح تيجيها مثلا الدورة الشهرية أو female sexual or menstrual cycle once each month. تمام؟ So it will be producing one oocyte each month. What we should know that during the sexual cycle each month, only one ovary will produce one ovum. So if this month the right ovary produced an ovum, the next month the left ovary will be responsible for the ovulation process and the right one will be in rest. So we are producing one oocyte or one ovum each month from one side or one ovary alternatively. So during her reproductive life, we will use like 400 or 500 of these follicles, and other follicles are not used. When the female reaches the menopause age, the remnant oocytes or the remnant follicles will be degenerated because the hormonal system that we talked about will be inhibited in the female at the menopause age. هلا بالنسبة للسكريشن of these hormones هلا رح نتعرف كيف ال FSH وال LH will be secreted during the female sexual cycle, but the GnRH hormone it will not follow that pattern. The GnRH hormone is produced all the time in our bodies as bursts every 90 minutes. كل ساعة ساعة ونص بصير في عنا زي bursts of GnRH، لكن ال FSH وال LH إلهم pattern معين during the month. So looking at the ovaries، خلينا أرجع على هداك الفيجر بس علشان نحكي كم من شغلة عنه. هذا الفيجر هلا هون في عندي primordial follicles. اللي بدنا نعرف عن هدول primordial follicles under the stimulation of the follicle stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary gland, several primordial follicles will start trying to get mature. Now, so it's about 6 to 12 follicles will be competing between each other to be maturing, and one follicle will be mature and be ready to get the ovum or the secondary oocyte out to be ovulated. So احنا عندنا ببلشوا 6 أو 12 واحد مع بعضهم البعض. Only one of them will reach the end stage اللي هو رح يكون هو mature follicle and will be responsible for the ovulation process. So this is the secondary oocyte that will go outside, and this is the premature or the mature follicle. So this stage in the ovary, we call it the follicular stage or pre-ovulatory stage. So the ovulation اللي هو الحد الفاصل. Before the ovulation, we call it pre-ovulatory. After the ovulation, we call it post-ovulatory. We call the pre-ovulatory stage, we call it follicular stage because it's responsible and it's composed of follicle maturing. And after the ovulation, we call it luteal stage because the corpus luteum is responsible for this stage in the ovaries. So we are talking about the cycle inside the ovaries themselves. طيب هلا خلينا نحكي عن الهرمونال changes اللي بتصير during the female sexual cycle. Looking at this figure, it's showing that during 28 days, how the changes in follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are secreted from the anterior pituitary. هلا شو هي 28 days؟ هي female sexual cycle اللي هي the female menstrual cycle that it on average it comes every 28 days. في females it will come every 20 days. في females ممكن 30 days ممكن 45 days, but we are talking about the average. If we understand what's going on 28 days, then we will know whatever the period was in the female. So in the first part of the ovarian cycle that is before the ovulation, we say the ovulation will be the cut point. Before the ovulation, we have the pre-ovulatory or follicular stage. During this stage, the anterior pituitary gland will produce follicle stimulating hormone in more amount than the luteinizing hormone. Okay? Why? Because it's responsible for follicle maturing. And at this stage, we need this hormone to start the maturing of these follicles. And as I said, around 6 to 12 follicles will be competing between each other to be mature and to get ovulating and get the secondary oocyte from these follicles. So the follicle stimulating hormone is the only hormone responsible for the follicle development and follicular maturing. هلا في عندي types of follicles. The primordial follicle زي ما حكينا انه female child is born with a primordial follicle, which is the primary oocyte surrounded by one layer of granulosa cells. These granulosa cells are responsible for the nourishment and producing the maturing inhibiting factor. And we have the plasma, the basement membrane, and surrounded by stromal cells that will be developed then by the luteinizing hormone into theca cells. We have the primary follicle, which it will take place after puberty. Then the female will be born with primordial follicle. At puberty, several layers of granulosa cell will be surrounding the primary oocyte. There will be a layer of glycoproteins surrounding the primary oocyte. We call it zona pellucida. And these granulosa cells will be increasing in number. And the stromal cells will start developed into the theca folliculi, and there will be theca cells later on. The secondary follicle هلا بالنسبه للبيوبرتي بلش انتاج الاف اس اتش هرمون، بلشت بعديه كمان بالمرحله لما نوصل لهي المرحله معناته الانتير بيتويتري بلشت كمان تنتج كميات قليله من اللوتينايزنج هرمون. Now the granulosa cells under the control of follicle stimulating hormone, it will produce the estrogen. Estrogen hormone will be in this antrum, what we call it antrum. It will be collected in the antrum. And theca cells, it will be differentiating into theca interna that are responsible for producing the 6 hormones, and theca externa that are responsible for the vascularization and connective tissue capsule. Now this secondary follicle, it will be developed into antral stage or secondary follicle. This antral stage where the high concentration of estrogen will be developed and will be concentrated here. هلا الجرانيولوزا cells will start producing the estrogen under the control of FSH hormone. So at this time in this cycle we have high concentration of FSH, high concentration of estrogen. When we have these two hormones together, ما في progesterone. When we have these two hormones together رح يلعبوا ما يسمى بالinternal positive feedback. يعني الجرانيولوزا cells بالFSH هرمون تعطي استروجين. هذا الاستروجين رح يزيد الFSH receptors على الجرانيولوزا cells. So these cells will be very sensitive to the very low levels of FSH. So this will increase the estrogen release more and more. At the same time, these two hormones will increase the LH receptors on the cells. ليه بدنا ال LH receptors إنها تزيد؟ برضو علشان هدول السيلز to be more sensitive for very low concentration of luteinizing hormone. Because luteinizing hormone at the ovulation process is the most important hormone. So we need to prepare this follicle for the ovulation process. Each follicle of the 6 to 12 follicles are doing this stuff. But only one follicle will have everything get together. This follicle, the positive feedback from the FSH and estrogen will inhibit, at some point, will inhibit the anterior pituitary from producing the FSH hormone. Then this follicle will be at the same safe side and it will be ovulating, and the other follicles will be degenerated in the ovaries. So not all follicles will reach the antral stage or the mature stage. Only one follicle, it will reach that stage, the strongest one, the largest one, the highest estrogen levels one, and it will inhibit the release of FSH hormone from the anterior pituitary and cause degeneration of other follicles. هذا بنحكي له اللي هو الفيزيكولار فوليكل اللي هو بكون عنده accelerated growth، وهدول الاكسلريتد جروث حكينا ايش هم اسبابهم. فهذا الماست رابيدلي جروينج فوليكل، وايش راح يصير بالاذر فوليكلز؟ راح يصير لهم انفوليوشن وراح يصير لهم ديجنريشن. هلا هذا الفيجر ممكن ميكس ستاف مور كلير. We have here a very high levels of FSH from the anterior pituitary gland under the control of gonadotropic releasing hormone. The anterior pituitary will produce the follicle stimulating hormone in more concentration than the luteinizing hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone affecting the ovaries by maturing the follicles. So its name is translated into maturing these follicles. So 6 to 12 follicles will start the process, but only one follicle will reach the antral stage and will reach to the mature stage. بنحكي له mature follicle, vesicular follicle, or graphene follicle. It will be ready to get ovulated, and the antrum will be filled with estrogen. So these are the hormones that are secreted in the first part of the cycle in the ovaries, what we call the follicular phase or follicular stage or pre-ovulatory stage. Now, once this follicle reach the mature stage, حكينا إنه بيثبط إنتاج ال FSH from the anterior pituitary gland. So the FSH hormone will slightly reduce, and this reduction will cause other follicles to be degenerated and only one follicle to reach the mature stage and the ovulating state. Now, at ovulation, what will happen to the hormones from the anterior pituitary gland? This follicle will get signals into the anterior pituitary that this follicle, the only follicle that we have in the ovary, is ready to get ovulating. So the anterior pituitary will increase the secretion of the luteinizing hormone in 10 more times than its previous concentration, and it will increase the follicle stimulating hormone secretion 2 to 3 times as well. But the major hormone that is responsible for the ovulating process is luteinizing hormone. We have what we call LH surge, which is a sudden high increase in luteinizing hormone level about 24 hours before the ovulation. This LH surge, why does it take place? Why does it happen? It's not well known so far, but they are saying that the mature follicle, it will bring signals to the anterior pituitary gland that it's ready to be ovulating, and so it will increase suddenly the secretion of the LH hormone, as well as the estrogen inside the follicle. Estrogen, it has what we call a peculiar effect, abnormal effect, that we usually know that with the negative feedback increase the result, it will inhibit the first step, صح؟ بالنيجاتيف feedback. الاستروجين لما يكون in moderate or low levels or in moderate levels خلينا نحكي certain level بيعمل inhibition للانتيريور pituitary. But when it's secreted in high levels with the FSH hormone, هدول التنين مع بعضهم البعض بيعملوا positive feedback للانتيريور pituitary تعطينا high levels of LH, FSH and gonadotropic releasing hormone من الهايبوثالاموس. فهدول هم التو theories اللي حطوهم علشان انهم يفسروا ليش بصير في عندنا LH surge, but the exact reason so far it's not known. So the LH surge will be preceding the ovulating process. Now the LH hormone, it will affect the granulosa cells and theca cells to produce different hormones. هلا اطلعوا لما يزيد عندنا ال LH hormone, الاستروجين level will start getting down and it will stimulate the production of progesterone. And this is another theory that the reduction in estrogen and increase in progesterone secretion, it will tell the anterior pituitary to increase the LH secretion and cause the ovulating process. تمام هذا الفيجر. So what are the actions that happening during the ovulation or lead to the ovulation? Rapid growth of the follicle, the surge of the LH hormone, initiation of progesterone secretion and diminishing of estrogen, and this will lead to the ovulation process. هلا at the follicle itself شو اللي بصير؟ أنا لما يصير عندي releasing of luteinizing hormone. اللuteinizing hormone اللي بدنا نعرفه إنه أنا عندي granulosa cells وأنا عندي theca cells. التنتين ببلشوا ينتجوا لنا هرمونات من الكوليسترول. هلا الاستروجين والبروجسترون والاندروجينز كلهم من وين بيجوا؟ من الكوليسترول. فانا عندي البريكيرسر الكوليسترول بتستخدمه الجرانيولوزا سيلز والثيكا سيلز تحت تاثير الليوتينايزنج هرمون علشان يعطونا من الكوليسترول بروجسترون. دائما اول منتج من الكوليسترول هو البروجسترون. هلا لما يكون عنده فوليكل ستيميوليتنج هرمون اف اس اتش راح يحفز الجرانيولوزا سيلز تحول كل البروجسترون والاندروجينز اللي بالجسم تحولهم لاستروجين تحت تاثير انزيم بنحكي له اروماتيز انزيم. فالاروماتيز انزيم راح يعمل له اكتيفيشن اللي هو الاف اس اتش هرمون بالجرانيولوزا سيلز. فعشان هيك احنا باول مرحله بالفوليكل ستيميوليتنج لما يكون عندي اف اس اتش هرمون كثير كل الهرمونات اللي بالجسم بتتحول الى استروجين. هلا مجرد ما صار في عندي ريليزنج اوف ذا ال اتش هرمون وقل الاف اس اتش هرمون بتضلها البروجسترون وعدد قليل منها اللي راح يتحول لاستروجين. فالاروماتيز راح يقل الاكتيفيتي تبعته. فبالتالي راح يزيد عندنا البروجسترون سكريشن من التو سيلز. والثيكا سيلز كمان فيها خاصيه انها بتحول البروجسترون لاندروجينز. فراح تزيد الاندروجينز والبروجسترون بالسكند بارت من السايكل. هلا البروجسترون اللي تم افرازه من الفوليكولار سيلز كيف راح تاثر على هذا الفوليكل؟ البروجسترون راح يحفز الانزيمز اللي باللايسوسومز انها تطلع مثل البروتياز والكولاجينيز فبتعمل weakening of the wall of the follicle. كمان بتعمل بروستاجلاندين سكريشن من هدول السيلز. والبروستاجلاندين وظيفته يعمل هاي فاسكولارايزيشن يعمل فازو دايليشن. فلما يصير عندي فازو دايليشن راح تفوت الفلويدز لداخل الفوليكل من البلد من البلازما. فراح تدخل فلويدز لداخل الفوليكل والفوليكل اصلا الوول تبعه ويك. ايش حيصير فيه؟ فبصير له رابتشر. فبيطلع من عنده هيك ديجنريشن اوف ستيغما اللي هي زي نقطه الضعف اللي راح تحدث من هذا الفوليكل راح يصير من عندها رابتشر. فبالاخر فوليكل سويلنج مع الديجنريشن اوف ذا وار رح يصير في عندنا فوليكل رابتشر واللي هي بنحكي لها الاوفيوليشن. فهذا البري اوفيوليتري ماتشور فوليكل رح يصيروا رابتشر. بتطلع السكندري فوليكل لبرا تروح على الفالوبيان تيوب waiting for a sperm to be fertilized. وهذا الفوليكل اللي صار رابتشرنج بيضل inside the ovaries. تمام؟ هلا هاي هي الريزونز واي ذا ال اتش سيرج ات ويل تيك بليس وهي موجوده بهذا الفيجر. هذا الفيجر ببين لي زي هيك ملخص اللي احنا حكيناه انه الهايبوثالاموس بتعطي جي ان ار اتش على الانتيريور بيتويتري بتعطينا اف اس اتش هرمون باول بارت من السايكل. فهون احنا عندنا الاوفيوليشن ما قبل الاوفيوليشن اللي هي الفوليكولار فيز. الاف اس اتش هرمون بخلي الفوليكلز تو بي ماتشورينج وبعدين الجروث لهم بصير في عندنا سكريشن اوف استروجين. هلا هذا اللي بدي احكي عنه انه الهاي ليفلز اوف استروجين لما ما يكون في بروجسترون بتعمل بوزيتيف فيدباك على الانتيريور بيتويتري والهايبوثالاموس تعطي هرموناتهم. فعشان هيك بصير ال اتش سيرج. هاي من الثيوريز اللي انحطت. لكن لما يكون مودريت ليفلز اوف استروجين بتعمل نيجاتيف فيدباك بتعمل انهبيشن. لكن في كريتيكال ليفل الاستروجين بيكون موجود بالفوليكولار ستيج هو اللي بيسبب الانكريز اوف ذيز هرمونز. بعدين بالميد سايكل اللي هي ال اتش هرمون ويل بي سكريتد بيخلي هذا الفوليكل تو بي ريدي تو جيت رابتشرد زي ما حكينا التشينجز اللي حتصير فيه وبصير له رابتشر وبصير له اوفيوليشن. وهاي البارت رح نحكي عنه بالمحاضره الجاي. حدا عنده اي سؤال؟ سجلوا حضور يعطيكم العافيه.